For 761 days, 8 people lived in total agonizing silence in a hidden annex in Amsterdam. They were literally just a few feet away from safety when a single phone call destroyed everything. Welcome to today's explainer, the Hidden Traitor. Who really betrayed Anne Frank? The story of Anne Frank is known to millions, but today we're diving into a deeply unsettling, decades-old mystery surrounding her tragic fate.
For decades, the world has asked one harrowing question. Who held the phone? Who is on the other end of that line telling the Nazis exactly where to look? Was it a neighbor, a coworker, maybe just a stranger passing by?
The identity of this betrayer has remained a ghost in the machine of history. It's this historical cold case that has haunted researchers for 80 years. So today, we're opening this file. We're going to examine the suspects, the secrets, and some highly controversial evidence that shows how betrayal is sometimes born out of impossible, truly horrific choices.
Let's start with part 1. August 4th, 1944, and the raid on Prinsengracht 263.
It was a hot Friday morning. Inside the Secret Annex, survival meant absolute, unbroken silence. To give you a sense of what that was actually like, they couldn't flush the toilet, they couldn't wear shoes, they had to speak strictly in whispers. The Allies had recently landed in Normandy, so the end of the war felt incredibly reachable. But right below them was a functioning warehouse, which meant any unnatural noise could be a literal death sentence. And this fragile safety held right up until exactly 10:30 a.m. At 10:30 a.m., a car suddenly pulled up outside. SS officer Karl Silberbauer and 3 Dutch members of the Groener Politie arrived. And notice how fast this escalated. By 10:32, the officers walked directly into the building. By 10:35, they targeted the revolving bookcase hiding the entrance. They didn't wander around blindly. They knew exactly where to go.
Pointing a pistol at Otto Frank, the officer demanded, "Where are your jewels?" And the really crucial point here is what he didn't say. He didn't ask if anyone was hiding there. He just demanded valuables. So this wasn't some random sweep, right? It was a targeted raid. Somebody, somewhere, had provided a tip.
Which brings us to Section 2, the warehouse suspects, the eyes inside.
To figure out who made that call, historians essentially built a giant metaphorical suspect board. First up, Willem van Maaren, a curious, recently hired warehouse worker. He reportedly set traps, like he'd leave small objects on tables to see if they were moved during the night. And actually, Otto Frank himself suspected him for years. Next on the list was Lena Hartog, a neighbor and a worker's wife. Rumors suggested she was terrified her husband would be arrested for helping Jews, and she might have made the call just to protect him.
But, here is the incredibly frustrating reality of history. Despite all these suspicions and literally decades of names circulating, none of the evidence ever produced a definitive answer. The trail just went completely cold.
That is, until Section 3, the 2022 revelation, where modern forensics meets history.
The case sat cold for years, until a massive modern investigation was launched, led in part by a former FBI agent. First, they used modern data analysis and investigative methods. Second, they reconstructed informant networks and historical arrests all across the city. This huge digital mapping project then led them to Step 3, analyzing a highly specific piece of physical evidence, an anonymous post-war letter that was sent directly to Otto Frank. And that letter named one specific person, Arnold van den Bergh. Now, this was absolutely shocking. Van den Bergh wasn't some Nazi sympathizer. He was a prominent Jewish businessman, and he even served on the Jewish Council. So you have to ask, why on earth would he betray his own people?
Well, before we dive into that, we absolutely must be clear. This is a theory, not a confirmed conclusion. It is heavily disputed by historians, and the case officially remains unresolved. But the investigators' theory suggests a truly harrowing motive. They believe Van den Bergh might have shared lists of hiding addresses with the Nazis purely to protect his own family from the gas chambers.
This brings us to Section 4, the price of survival, and those impossible circumstances. If this disputed theory holds even a shred of truth, it forces us to confront an incredibly uncomfortable reality, weighing the choice of protecting your own family from execution versus sacrificing another family in hiding. If the theory is correct, this betrayal wasn't born out of malice or greed. It was born of desperate, agonizing circumstances where survival itself was at stake. Otto Frank actually kept this anonymous letter in his files for years, but he never went public with it. Why? Well, perhaps he was unwilling to inflict more pain on another family that had already been scarred by the war. Or perhaps he understood that, quote, during the Holocaust, the line between victim and perpetrator could become painfully complicated under extreme pressure.
But regardless of who actually made the call, whether it was Van den Bergh, Van Maaren, or just some anonymous neighbor, the tragic result was exactly the same. 8 people were arrested. 8 people were sent to the camps, and only one, Otto Frank, returned. The betrayal at Prinsengracht not only ended a hiding place, it nearly silenced a voice meant for generations.
So it leaves us with this heavy question. Will the true betrayer of Anne Frank remain forever a ghost in the machine of history? It's a really stark reminder that the darkest parts of history aren't just about the people who pull the trigger, they're about the desperate choices made in the shadows. What do you think? Have modern forensics finally cracked this, or is this destined to be a mystery we can never truly unravel? Keep questioning, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me for today's Explainer.